All right, welcome back to another episode of the Doc Talk. And today we are going to talk about diabetes, specifically type 2 diabetes mellitus. So, we're not talking about this in regards to teaching you what that is or what the medications are. The purpose of today's podcast really is to help you understand this disease so that you can take control of it. Quite often patients come into our offices, and with the time constraints that we're under these days, you know, physician shortages, more and more patients are sick. So the time slots are getting less and less to see patients. And often we just have to let our patients know, this is what's going on. Your numbers are this. Really, we got to bring it down to this number. And we're going to have to use XYZ medication. And here are some quick tips and tricks. And that's pretty much about it. And I feel that is a disservice to our community and our patients. So, we're going to elaborate on diabetes and try to teach you guys what we wish we can do in our family medicine offices. So, with that being said, you want to tell us a little bit about what type 2 diabetes is?
Yeah, so in order to understand what diabetes is, you have to understand what insulin is.
So, real quick, what's the prevalence of this?
It's about 10% in the US. So, right now there's about 38 million Americans who have diabetes, and 95% of those 38 million have type 2 diabetes, which is what we're talking about today.
And that was according to 2021 stats. So, we're in
So it's
2025.
exactly likely it's much worse now. Type 1 diabetes is just for ease of understanding, is a diabetes you're typically born with, okay? And type 2 diabetes is typically the diabetes that you develop over time, and it's influenced by your general metabolic health. So, like I was saying, in order to understand what diabetes is, you have to understand what insulin is, okay? Insulin is a chemical produced in your body, okay, with its largest function being to put away the glucose that you eat, okay? Every time that you eat something, whatever food it is gets broken down into glucose, all right? Each food has a different amount of glucose that's going to bring in your body, but all of them are producing some amount of glucose. Once you break that down into glucose in the bloodstream, insulin comes out and tells that glucose to go where it needs to go. Go to your muscle, go to your liver, go to wherever it needs to be directed to. If insulin is not there and nobody is there to tell the glucose where to go, that glucose will stay in your bloodstream. If it stays in your bloodstream, that is diabetes. So having too much glucose running through your blood with nowhere to go is diabetes.
And that is where the story actually begins. And this is where the whole concept of insulin resistance and all that stuff comes into place. So, insulin comes out in two phases when we eat. So, as soon as you eat, as soon as the sugar hits the bloodstream, phase one of insulin starts, which is a quick, rapid release to control that sugar so it doesn't spike too high. That's about like a few minutes to 5 minutes. And then after that, phase two kicks in around 10 to 15 minutes later. And that is what sustains the blood sugar so it doesn't keep going too high. And where is all the sugar being sent? Here, I mentioned this already, the muscle, liver, and some in the fat cells. But here's the kicker that nobody understands: 70 to 80% of that glucose goes into your muscles.
Mm-hmm.
So now, with that information, imagine if you were somehow able to add more muscle to your body. Wouldn't that equal to better control of glucose?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's a really big factor, and it's something that can not only help you prevent diabetes, but it can also help you better manage your diabetes if you already have diabetes. Because, the truth is that just because you have diabetes doesn't mean that you are now condemned to an eternally unhealthy life and you're going to stroke out and your kidneys are going to fail. The truth is that you can have diabetes and you can maintain very, very good control over that and still live a generally healthy lifestyle. And building skeletal muscle and having more muscle mass to eat up more glucose is probably one of the easiest ways to take control of it.
That's correct. So let's talk about how do we even come to the conclusion that somebody has diabetes. There are
Hmm.
a few tests we do. I'll highlight the few that are common that we use usually. You have to have 2 fasting blood glucose checks, and if they're consistently 126 or above, that confirms you have type 2 diabetes mellitus. Or you can use another marker called the hemoglobin A1C. That basically gives us a 3-month average of what the glucose is. And for that one, 6.5 and above is considered type 2 diabetes mellitus. Now, 5.7 to 6.4 A1C, that's pre-diabetes, okay? You're like hovering in that insulin resistance phase now. It's getting there. And 100 to 125 on the fasting glucose numbers, we usually call it impaired fasting glucose, or it could equate to pre-diabetes too, you know? And then in pregnancy, it's a different way of doing stuff.
Hmm.
So that's how we get to the conclusion of you have type 2 diabetes mellitus.
Hmm. So now what's happening if you have diabetes, right? You wake up in the morning, you eat your breakfast, your breakfast that goes inside you gets broken down into glucose. That glucose is sitting in your bloodstream. Now, in theory, you want insulin to come out and say, hey, glucose, go to the muscle. Hey, glucose, go to the liver. Okay. Now, insulin does come out and it does say that, but your cells just don't listen. Okay. And that not listening to insulin is called insulin resistance. So what Irfan was talking about, how that's you develop insulin resistance, and that makes either the impaired fasting glucose or diabetes. The difference between diabetes and impaired fasting glucose, also called pre-diabetes, is simply the amount of resistance. So in pre-diabetes, your cells have already started to become resistant to insulin. Diabetes is just when they've crossed a certain threshold of how resistant they are.
Then the question becomes, well, how do they become resistant? What's going on over here? Um, it's a very simple explanation, right? Um, if your blood always has a lot of glucose in there, your pancreas is always working overtime to push out more insulin to bring this blood glucose down. I mean, the receptors on these muscle cells in the liver areas, they get bombarded by so much insulin that eventually those receptors begin to not care what's going on. And so now the pancreas has to push more insulin out to clean up that glucose. And at that point, eventually it starts to fail. And that is where we start getting into medications. Um, so I'll let you touch base a little bit about what these medications are and why will we start these at what point, you know?
Mm-hmm. So typically, depending on the patient, you want to be starting medications when somebody's A1C hits 6.5 in most patients, which is when you have diabetes. Now, in some patients, there's some benefit to starting medications even before the A1C of 6.5. So while they're in the pre-diabetic stage. So, for example, if you have a patient who has a lot of risk factors for diabetes, they have a strong family history, they're obese, they have a generally unhealthy lifestyle, then once they hit an A1C that's in the pre-diabetic range, you kind of know that there's a very high chance that this is going to escalate into diabetes.
They're heading in the wrong direction.
Exactly.
And at that point, they have 2 options, like she's alluding to. We could start considering medications, or we really need to sit down and have a discussion and do like a wake up call, like, hey, listen, you're consuming too much food. There's too much glucose in the blood. Either you back off or you're going to need a medication.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you don't do either of these, you are going to become a diabetic.
Mm-hmm. Or you need the combination of the two. In some people, you really do need medications. And believe it or not, genetics plays a huge role in this. You really can be a very, very healthy person and still be high risk for diabetes simply because of your genetics. And so you can start medications in that pre-diabetic range to prevent the diabetes. And obviously, once you've gone into the diabetic range, pretty much all the time you are starting medications. Now, I'll tell you, I have had patients who have gone into the diabetic range but are very insistent that, you know what, no, I don't want to become dependent on a medication, and I'm going to take control. I'm going to go to a diabetes education center or go see a dietitian, and I'm going to make the exact changes that I need to make in my life and reverse this. And it is very, very possible.
Those success stories are amazing,
Mm-hmm.
phenomenal. I've had patients drop their hemoglobin A1C from 11 down to 6.5, which I told you at 6.5 you become diabetic, so 11 is high. All because they changed their diet. And now this is where we're going to where things are going to get real interesting. So tell us now, how can we control this with diet? How do they
Mm-hmm.
do that?
Yeah. So there's two things that you can control with diet mainly that are going to help you prevent diabetes or to improve your diabetes, okay? The first thing is making sure that the foods that you are eating have a lower glycemic index. What that means is that when you eat the food, how much glucose does it break down into immediately? Okay? So a chocolate bar versus a piece of whole grain bread, okay? Both carbohydrates, very different glycemic index. When you eat the chocolate bar, you need to release a very large amount of insulin to react to that large amount of glucose and put it away.
The sugar spike is huge.
Exactly. And so that's called a food with high glycemic index. Now, since we're talking about insulin resistance, if you're releasing a lot of insulin, your cells are going to become more and more resistant to it. Because again, it's like yelling at a kid. The more that you yell at the kid, the more resistant they become. Okay, that's the first way. So control the glycemic index of the foods that you're eating. Try to lean towards foods that have a lower glycemic index. Generally speaking, and this is nobody's ever going to argue with this, proteins, fruits and vegetables are your best friends. That's where you want to go. Okay.
Because the insulin spike doesn't happen. Remember, it's all about that spike. When the pancreas has to shoot out too much insulin to bring this glucose down, eventually the pancreas gets burnt out and tired as well.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yep.
so we have to realize that too. We've been talking about insulin resistance at the tissues where that they take up the glucose, but you have to also realize that this pancreas right here eventually begins to burn out
Yep,
over
it can
time.
only make so much insulin for so long, right? And so the second way that you can control with diet is the frequency of eating, right? So the more frequently you eat, the more glucose you will make and the more insulin your body will need to release. And the more frequently it'll need to release the insulin. The less frequently that you eat, the less resistance you're going to build because your body will now go through extended periods of time where you're not releasing a lot of insulin. And so A, the pancreas is not burning out, B, the cells are not getting tired of being yelled at by insulin. So that's the way that you control it with diet. Another really interesting way in which you can control it is with muscle building. So you would tell us a little
100%.
bit about that, Irfan.
So remember, I told you initially that around 70 to 80% of the glucose in the blood gets taken up by the muscle. So there you go. It's very simple. If you eat the appropriate amount of protein in your diet and you're doing resistance training of some type and you're adding muscle, we're not talking about the bodybuilding type.
Yep.
So this is where this is hilarious. Times have changed so much. So in the early 90s, early 2000s, people thought drinking protein shakes, lifting weights, going to the gym was some bodybuilding thing. Ah, man, times have changed, and now we realize, how important resistance training really is to the longevity and overall health of humans.
For everybody.
We pushed cardio the whole time, and that's great. Cardiovascular exercise is great for your heart. But we're talking about longevity and living a long and healthy life. So muscle has benefits for a lot of things, but on today's discussion, we're talking about how adding more muscle can help remove more glucose out of the bloodstream. Think of it really easily. The muscle is the sponge, okay? Muscle sponges up the glucose. So more muscle, more glucose gone. More glucose gone out of the blood means you're going to need to release less insulin out of the pancreas. So less insulin out of the pancreas means less insulin resistance now because it's not bombarding these things anymore, which now means your sugars are more controlled, which now means we can eventually start getting you off of some of the medications if you're on those.
Yep. And the really interesting thing about skeletal muscle, which is all the muscle that you use for movement, is that it doesn't actually need insulin to pick up the glucose.
There's two ways it does it.
Exactly. So there's most of the cells in your body need insulin to tell them to, hey, pick up this glucose. But your muscle can independently put out receptors to pick up that glucose without the signal from insulin.
And that happens via muscular contraction. So here's the first tip I'm going to give you. If there's something I want you guys to take away from today is one change. Look, change is built one step at a time. You can never bombard yourself with multiple steps and different angles, and I'm going to start a crash diet, a crazy gym regimen. No, one by one. Take this one thing away from today. After you eat, go and get a 10-minute walk. Muscular contraction is another way that the muscles send the receptor to the cell, and that receptor eats up the glucose basically. When that receptor gets activated, the glucose comes into the muscle. So you going for a 10-minute walk is now going to make your muscles more primed to take more glucose out of your bloodstream regardless of insulin. So guess what's happening now? You ate your meal. As we discussed earlier, when you eat food, the glucose spikes. But now you're on your 10-minute walk and the glucose is spiking, but now your muscles are also automatically taking in that glucose out of the blood by themselves with the contraction of the muscle and with the help of insulin. So you need less insulin now, also. Better glucose control. So just after every meal, try to take a 10-minute walk.
Mhm.
And if you cannot do it with every meal, that's fine. Try to do it with your biggest meal first. And honestly, you will see a measurable difference.
Hmm. Yeah, and you don't have to go walk outside. You can go up and down the stairs 10 times, just keep moving. Somehow keep moving for 10 minutes after you're done eating and let that glucose get taken up by your muscles instead of needing lots more insulin to put it in other places.
Another real great tool in the market is these continuous glucose monitors. They are usually prescribed to diabetics that are really with high level A1Cs and really out of control, because we really need to know exactly what's going on minute by minute or hour by hour on their glucose stuff, so we can adjust things, understand where the spikes are happening. Even for the general population, if you're able to get your hands on these things, sometimes just wearing one of these monitors for a week and eating your regular food and then seeing the thing on your phone, man, that pizza really spiked my glucose.
Hmm.
That feedback that you get can be life changing too.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying get this monitor and live with it forever.
Hmm.
Just that 1 week experiment is very eye opening, and you get to understand how your body is handling different type of foods. Like pizza spiked it super high. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich, it was a nice smooth rise of glucose. It came down.
Yeah, use it as a learning tool. Really look at what every single food does to your body at the chemical level, because that's what you're seeing on that monitor is you're seeing the fluctuation of glucose. And lots of people use that information to come up with a healthier way to live and, pick the foods that are going to be good for them to eat and maintain a healthier lifestyle. So it's just another tool that you can use that's out there. But again, it's difficult to access and it's unrealistic.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So just start with a 10-minute walk after your biggest meal
Hmm.
and see the difference.
Yeah. You could talk about diabetes for, hours and not be done talking about diabetes. So we'll definitely do more podcasts on this. We'll talk about how diabetes actually affects all the organs too.
Yes.
But I think that's enough diabetes for today. What do you
Yeah, I
think?
think this is good. I think it's gone long
Yeah.
enough. So
I think we need a glucose spike now.
yes. So thank you for joining us again today. We hope you learned something, and we hope maybe you can make a difference, a change in your life that
Mhm.
may be beneficial to you.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you guys later.